we got some new reporting over at the Status newsletter about this major digital transformation and project that is underway that's tightly held under wraps. This is CNN's new streaming service that they're going to debut. They've said they're going to debut it in the fall. You got some really illuminating new reporting saying that in the next month, in early September, they're looking to do what's called a code freeze, which means we're basically in the end zone of building this thing out, and that the network is targeting a current launch in October. So it's actually on the early side of, I would say that's the early side of fall, which is pretty good. These things always slip. So I was actually expecting more like end of the year. But it's still unclear what this streaming service is going to do. Obviously, CNN, a fixture of cable, I mean, it's literally in its name, is now fighting the waters that everyone is fighting, which is how do we become a brilliant digital online presence that people will turn to for breaking news and analysis, and that ultimately people will subscribe to and pay money for. Right now, if you're paying for cable like you and I do, a portion of those dollars obviously goes to CNN, and then they obviously have advertising that runs on the air as well. That's a really healthy revenue stream, but as people keep cutting the cord, you got to fill those gaps somewhere. And journalism is not cheap. And this network is staffed with journalists not only across the country, but around the world. So this Mark Thompson, he's the chief executive there, this new initiative to launch a streamer is a pretty big deal. What have you learned about what they're doing here?
Yeah, well, it seems, so this could get pushed. We don't know. They're targeting October for the launch date. They haven't announced anything. They just said they're going to launch in the fall, which, as you noted, and as our former chief executive at CNN, Chris Licht, once reminded everyone, fall goes to December, I believe, right? Like it's a very long season. So who knows if this gets pushed or not, but they are targeting fall and they are targeting early September for what's called a code freeze. So the engineers will stop doing the actual code. They will move into rehearsals and actually testing the product to make sure there's no bugs. And if there are, they can squash those before they actually roll this thing out. It's supposed to roll out, on the leaner side, which makes sense. You don't roll out a big product because if there are bugs, you want to be able to, fix them quickly. So my understanding is it rolls out rather lean, and then they start adding in features over time, which again makes sense. What we don't know is what programming is going to be on this. It seems to me that you'll be able to log in and watch CNN, on this app, but there also will be some original programming on here. And we're starting to get clues, I think, John, of what that might be or what some of it might be from the job postings that are just publicly available. So you and I actually were surfing these job postings and noticed a bunch of interesting ones. Among them is this new team they're apparently building. It's called the Explainers team, which is going to, I assume, just do basic explanatory journalism that will work on the streamer, but will also live possibly on other places like YouTube, TikTok, Instagram. And it strikes me as similar to almost what the New York Times is doing, where maybe they have a story on tariffs and they get their correspondent, covers economics, to front a piece about like, here's what tariffs will do to like the donut industry or whatever. Or here's how tariffs work. And there's like these graphics that come up on air. It's like, it's nicely executed and done. And if you go on the New York Times homepage, you'll see those as vertical video. If you click on them or share them, it'll go to a video page and you can watch them in like the regular format. And that strikes me as potentially what CNN's trying to do here, which is like, I hate to say this, but like they call themselves the video leader, but they're actually behind on creating a lot of these digital videos, and places like the New York Times have moved ahead of them. And so it's almost like catching up to what some of these other news organizations like the New York Times or even Vox Media, what their explanatory journalism videos, what they're doing. They have to play some catch up. So they're launching this new team called the Explainers team. It's under the division of streaming. So I imagine that will be baked into the streamer. And then we'll see what is this streamer. We still really don't know, and it's possible that it won't launch with much, and we'll have to they'll keep building stuff into it.
Yeah, I wonder if that would draw an audience that would pay.
Are you bullish on this, John? Are you going to subscribe?
Well, I already pay for cable. So, I'm already getting like the flagship product, and CNN already has built a paywall on its website in the last year, almost a year now. Yeah. I think maybe it's a year, right? And they're charging $4 a month for this, and that gets you unlimited access to CNN.com, which has, all of their reporting from all their journalists around the world, plus like all the video clips that they clip from the air, live stories, all that. And so you're already getting that. This would be in addition to it. So you would, I guess, have an
we don't know. I mean, we don't know what the pricing is going to look like. Maybe if you subscribe online, I assume there'll be tiers, right? Yeah. And so maybe you subscribe online, you get a basic tier or different tiers. So if you should let us know what it's going to look like. But the interesting thing about the paywall, and as CNN plots its digital future, what I've noticed about the paywall is it's almost a year now that it's been rolled out, and I can bypass their paywall with one click, which seems strange to me that a year in, it's that easy to get around their paywall. All you do is, if you're opening the thing up in Safari, this is a pro tip for everyone, you just go to reader mode, you hit show reader mode, and you can bypass the entire paywall, read any story you want. And I don't know, like I think that indicates there's a lot more work on the technology front that they need to get, they need to address. And, we're basically approaching the 2-year anniversary since Mark Thompson took over as chief executive of CNN. I think we might have already passed the 2-year anniversary of when he was technically appointed, but he took over in the fall after he was appointed in the summer. He's talked a lot about the necessity for CNN to change from a cable news network to a digital news organization. And he has written memo after memo explaining that this needs to happen, this must happen, change is on the way, this is going to happen. Now it seems like, and there's been stuff slowly happening behind the scenes. They've hired a bunch of senior vice presidents, but now it seems like we're moving into the public execution phase, where we're actually going to see the products that they've talked about for the last 2 years, see these lifestyle products like the health and wellness product I guess they're launching, the weather app, the streamer, and see whether people actually want to pay for this stuff and how it's executed. And I think that marks it's new. I mean, it's easy to talk. He's not going to ever be judged. Mark Thompson is never going to be judged on what he says in the memos about like what he wants the future to look like for CNN, where it needs to go. Everyone agrees it needs to go to a digital future. Everyone agrees they need to have their own subscribers. That's easy to do. I could write those memos, right? You could have wrote those same memos on day one. That's an obvious play. The question is whether the products they're going to bring to the public are going to meet a demand and whether consumers are going to want to pay for them. And especially in this very crowded news environment where you can get the Wall Street Journal for like $1 a week. You can get the New York Times for like maybe $1 a month or $1 a week. The Washington Post is basically like, I think we saw a rate like 50 cents or something. It was insanely cheap. There's a lot of competition in this space for general news. And are people going to actually turn to CNN, turn to this product, or go to the competitors? And that remains to be seen.
I am more curious than ever how CNN will make the case that you should pay for this. And that's going to be the distinction between this and what we're seeing at like NBC News now. Fox has their own Fox Nation streaming service, which is like not a news product at all, even aside from the fact that Fox News is more of a propaganda outlet. Fox Nation is like this, even farther right fantasy land of opinion hosts and shows. Tucker Carlson, I think, had a series on there that caused some real backlash. But I do wonder, like, is an explainer team that you're as a video product going to move the needle and get people to sign up when you have something like every day there's a podcast called Vox by Vox called like Today Explained, right? And that's a free product and it rolls some advertisements, but are people going to pay for that? What do they really want out of a visual medium like this? Is it live breaking news or is it analysis that they can't get anywhere else? It's maybe a combination of that. I'm curious what strategies and tactics Mark Thompson has up his sleeve for this.
Yeah, I mean, I think what the reason people subscribe to Status, and I think the reason people subscribe to other news organizations, is they often have information, scoops that you can't get anywhere else. And so if you want to know what's going on in the White House, you're subscribing to the New York Times or the Washington Post. Or if you want to know what's happening in the business community, you're subscribing to the Wall Street Journal, because they have the reporters who are delivering exclusive information. And that information at this point only lives behind the paywall. And I think CNN's challenge is it's never really, it's always been more of a general news outlet where they have some scoops and some journalism, but typically it's made free, or it's delivered on air. So if I already subscribe to cable, why am I paying, or why would I pay for the online service, especially if I can bypass their paywall in 2 seconds? Like, I don't know if they still even have the reporting muscle. I mean, they don't have the reporting muscle that the New York Times does, right? Like the New York Times has for many, many years built up a strong reporting muscle. And I think that it was an easier transition for the New York Times to put a paywall on the internet, even though it was very controversial at the time as well. But it was easier because the New York Times has always been a subscription-based product, right? People have been used to paying directly for the New York Times to get delivered on their papers, and then eventually they had to train them to pay for the digital copy. CNN has always been part of a bundle. So people think in their brains they get it for free, right? Oh, I get it for free on cable. Yes, you're paying for it indirectly. You're paying Comcast, which is then paying CNN for that content. But it's going to be a challenge, I think, for people to be like, oh, wait, I have to pay for CNN now? I don't know. Do I want to? Wait, why would I pay for CNN when I pay for the New York Times? The New York Times is cheaper, maybe, or like around the same price for the first year, and offers cooking and Wordle and sports, and maybe I'll go with the New York Times, right? Like,
well, and I think this is why difficult. CNN is trying to really lean into the lifestyle, right? They have a job listing up for a new wellness and health vice president and an who will work with their editorial lead. We've seen them say that they're going to launch this weather app. They're leaning more into the lifestyle. Didn't they launch a game? They have games now on their website as well. It seems like they're trying to replicate some of that magic. Mm-hmm. But a video product, a streaming service, is very different than paywalling a website. And I think the New York Times, like you pointed out, had a much easier task to convert from print and where subscribers were to the website. It's the same product, it's the same medium. It's just text, right? And you can add a lot of great photography and visual elements to it, but ultimately you're moving print from one place to the other. Video is a much more challenging environment. And like you said, now people are going to have to pay directly for it. I specifically want to pay for CNN. Whereas right now, your in-laws might be paying for cable because they want to watch ESPN and Fox News, and CNN just happens to come along with.
The New York Times, too, we forget about this because now we're just used to the New York Times having over 10 million subscribers. And, but the New York Times benefited enormously from the Trump bump back in 2015, 2016. Mm-hmm. Like I don't know, I don't have the numbers on hand, but they grew at a very fast rate during the first Trump administration when everyone was hyper-focused on what was happening inside the White House. People wanted to read about the Mueller investigation. And then obviously COVID happened. And that was a time that really generated a lot of subscriptions, both for the New York Times and the Washington Post and other news organizations that were subscription-based. CNN is now launching at a time when people have a lot of news fatigue. And yes, people do care to some extent about what's happening, obviously, but a lot of people are also tuned out for the second Trump administration. You see that in the cable ratings in itself, right? Like CNN was rated much higher 2015, 2016 than it is now. People are just not as interested for whatever reason. So I wonder if that's, like because they did not capitalize on the first administration on a subscription basis. And so now, that's really, how the New York Times grew. And so I don't know, it's going to be a tough uphill climb. It's not an impossible climb, but there's a lot of work I think that still needs to go into creating the subscription product, creating a brand that people will pay for. We haven't even talked about that. The CNN brand has been tarnished over the years because of how they've changed their approach to covering Donald Trump and the MAGA extremists. And it's all going to be very challenging. And they're running out of time. I think the time is the most important thing here. They're racing against the clock because cable news is crumbling below their feet here. And they have to figure out how to replace that business with a digital business very, very soon. And I guess we'll see if this is going to be it.
Well, they've got quite the road ahead of them. I'm very curious to see how this goes. And look, we are both, I should say, cheering them on. We both hope for the best for CNN. I think CNN is a force for good in our society. I think it generally helps set the tone that other news organizations are watching. Every newsroom I've ever been in, I've been in several, they all have CNN on. It is the place people turn to get their initial breaking news, their place where they understand, basic facts or what's happening. It's difficult to go, cover a ground war in Israel and Gaza, but CNN has a Tel Aviv bureau with staff there. But this is a tough transition, and I'm very curious where this goes now, and whether or not Mark Thompson and the team he's got there can pull it off.
Thank you for watching Power Lines. For more analysis and insight, subscribe to our YouTube channel down below, like this video, and you can watch more of us right over here.